We are here now live for the fourth episode of Cogdell Law Uncensored. I'm joined here with Tommy.
What's up? What's up?
And Dan Cogdell himself. Dan, how's it going?
Good morning, Vietnam. How are you guys?
We're doing good. So, as you guys can tell, our beautiful fan base, our beautiful growing fan base, we are in a new studio that we're going to be operating out of moving forward. That's pretty exciting. It used to be a Nike corporate office, so it's got a lot of cool posters, a lot of cool sports memorabilia throughout the space, and we're going to probably move the background just a bit just to kind of tie into the theme of what we're trying to do here at Uncensored. But man, it's been a minute since we sat down and formally talked. We were out in Houston last week. That was great. Thanks for having us. The fundraising event was awesome. But beyond that, the cigar bar that we went to, the night out we had with Anthony also was a cherry on top. Teaser pony. It was a cherry on top. We had a great time in Houston. Dan, how's your week going so far? How are all things Cogdell?
You know, it's just another day in the life of my life. I always liken myself to an emergency room physician. I think I know what my day is gonna present to me, and it never presents that. It always presents something else. So it was a hectic day, but it's a hectic life, so it's good.
Beautiful. Tommy, what about you? What was your experience going out to Houston? What did you think about that?
Houston was cool. It's my first time there.
Really?
The weather was a lot more humid. I couldn't imagine just a couple hours south is just a different weather, but I enjoyed it. I liked where we stayed, and I really appreciate, getting invited to the home and meeting the family and seeing the bike collection was really sweet.
No one moves to Houston for the weather. Spoiler alert. Not a single person says, I'm going to move there for the weather.
Well, it was cool coming out as your TikTok guys because everybody was really kind of, giving us our flowers for the work we've done so far. And, I have up here on the screen some of your analytics in a short, really just a little bit over a month now. Dan, you've gotten to a place, let me pull it up here, where we have almost 18.7, almost 19,000 total followers. And you're kind of getting, you really are building a genuine fan base. And it's pretty cool to see. I mean, over 6.6 million views so far across all your videos, and 37,000 shares, thousands of comments, thousands of likes. Being a kind of high profile criminal defense attorney, being on different local, national news outlets, having all these different types of conversations and kind of infamy, how do you feel right now with your TikTok fame? How does this land for you?
It gives me whiplash because if somebody would have told me, Aaron, 6 weeks ago, A, that I would be on TikTok, and B, we would have these kind of views, 6 million views, and creeping up on 20,000 followers, I would have suggested rehab, because that's never going to happen. I'm not going to get on TikTok. I don't dance. I have no idea what TikTok is about. But apropos to your question, I was at a funeral on Saturday for a great lawyer by the name of Ronnie Chris, and he was most famous for the Space Shuttle Challenger cases and other NASA-related cases. And, I mean, these dudes that are my age, right? They're 60, 65, 70, coming up. I saw you on TikTok. You were awesome. And I'm like, you were watching TikTok? But you were the ones, you and Tommy were the ones that were explaining the analytics of all this stuff to me. And I was just a lost passenger on a ship that, floating away, or whatever the metaphor is. I had no idea the reach that TikTok has. It's unbelievable.
The
reach that it has.
Yeah, it's we were showing Dan early before we started this project with him. Obviously, Dan was really cool enough to come on our podcast, A Foreign Exchange, which we're still going at it. But you've already tripled us in following in just a month's time, which is hilarious. But
are you ever in the comment section of your videos seeing what people are thinking?
Yeah, it cracks me up, and I every now and then I'm like, no, I want to, no. I mean, I think I commented once, but I just don't have the time, nor do I want to sort of to violate their flow. I mean, they have a good time ripping on me. Some are good, some are bad, and I would rather just kind of sit back, light the fuse, and watch it explode just to try to put out the fire.
Well, it's funny because people come at us often. They're like, we're not making the clips long enough, and we need to see more. And there's it just The trolls in the comment section, which we love, keep coming, keep talking. They say the funniest things because, prior to you even having a platform and, you didn't exist on TikTok just a month ago, right? And now you have a real influence, a real following, and people want to see more. They want to see you in long format. Of course, we have the full-length podcast on Cogdell Law Uncensored on YouTube as well for people to watch, which we direct them back into that direction. But like I told you before, most of the audience, they consume things in short format now, and that's why TikTok, with over billions of followers, has the kind of impact and reach that it has. And I want to dive into some of these comments and get some responses. So in the post of how you graduated first in your law school, did really well, good engagement, just like all your posts, but a lot of funny comments that were in this one.
The white Johnny Cochran.
The white, that's the one I wanted you to respond to. So Lee Maxey said, haven't heard that name in years. Richard Racehorse Haynes, he's the white Johnny Cochran. What's your response to that?
Well, of course, Haynes would have said that Johnny Cochran was the black racehorse Haynes. I mean, look, Johnny was a brilliant lawyer, but Haynes was an OG. Haynes was around long before, and frankly after Johnny Cochran. But that's a brilliant analogy. The white Johnny Cochran. That's awesome.
So we got one here that again on the other side is graduated first at a law school ranked 138 in a median LSAT of 154. Lowest score you can get is 140 out of 180. So we have some experts in the chat in terms of where you graduated from law school. Do you have any little response for question mark here?
Yeah, I never claimed that South Texas College of Law, which is where I went, was Harvard.
But it's bred some badass lawyers. I mean, people like to be experts in the chat. That's what I've known. There's no better lawyer than the comment section lawyers.
No, roll back down. Roll back. His icon is a question mark.
Icon's a question mark.
Okay. Well, good for you, dude. Get out of your mom's basement and get a life. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to this other video where there's a couple here that I also wanted to respond to.
There's one here on this post where you have a legit fan base that wants you to run for office. Is that any interest to you?
I can't take the pay cut. There was a time, Tommy, when I would have considered running for office, but I think social media has killed the desire of anybody with a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people with true intentions. It's just not a safe place to be. And I've got friends of mine, centimillionaires and billionaires and I'm like, dude, run for office. And they're like, not on a dare. There's no way I would subject my family to the scrutiny and the falsehoods and the bullshit that comes, not on a dare. And thanks to you guys, I'm a multi-thousandaire again, so I don't really have any economic concerns. But no, I could never run for office. I'm too straightforward, I think.
What's interesting is it's not just one, but it's several, right? Hey, brother, you'd be great Texas governor. Please run as an independent. So there's an appetite for what you have to say online. There's an audience for it. Clearly it's growing and the people want more. And so we're going to give them what they want. And we're going to just keep highlighting different cases that you've talked about and also continue to kind of rip through what's happening now and get your kind of 2 cents given.
Yeah, I love on Birmingham, Aaron's, how some people say 10 years is too long. And the other half is only 10 years.
Yeah, so the comments again, it's like you're gonna find everyone across the spectrum in terms of their opinions on what happened, and overall, we're super excited and grateful that you partnered with us, and everybody watching and listening. We appreciate you guys. Dan's awesome, and he truly is uncensored. He's the same man that he is on camera as he is off camera, and he genuinely wants to beat bullies and fight bullies and battle for the truth. And that's just the experience we've had so far. So it's clearly translating online. Dan, I want to kind of get into a couple potential cases that we want to see if there's a grounds for a lawsuit. So an Indian man wants to sue his parents for giving birth to him.
Oh, that's so awesome.
A 27-year-old Indian man plans to sue parents for giving birth to him without his consent. Mumbai businessman Raphael Samuel told the BBC that it's wrong to bring children into the world because they then have to put up with lifelong suffering. So, Dan, is there a case here for the 27-year-old man?
That is dumber than a bucket of hair. I mean, how would you ever get consent? Obtain consent from an unborn. What would Raphael suggest we do? Jesus Christ, man, you ungrateful piece of shit. What the fuck, Raphael?
Next up, we got another one here for you.
Oh.
This is actually a really controversial issue. Many of you may have seen this circulating around the social media about an Asian gentleman who sued his wife because they had children and the children looked nothing like them. And then later he realized that his wife had like 35 or 40 plastic surgeries and was unrecognizably different than she had started. And he sued her because...
So an Asian man sues his wife in China because his babies came out ugly, and later he finds out that she has 35 to 40 different plastic surgeries. Now, is there grounds for a case there?
Yeah, there's grounds for the case for him being a raging dumbass. I mean, maybe you should have done your due diligence on what wifey looked like, before 35 plastic surgeries. It can't be that hard. Get on Facebook, dude. Whatever. People are just shameless. I mean, they're absolutely shameless.
Shameless is 100% accurate. So we got two that, of course, that we're having a little bit of fun with. But this one's a little bit more on the serious side. So we have a police officer here who tackles a guy who seems to be cooperating. So this is about a minute-long clip. I want you to take a look. And
we can just play the first 15 seconds.
15 seconds.
Yeah.
So he continues to kind of like bully him around.
So in this video, he matches a description of a gentleman who's, I guess they're looking for carjacking or breaking into cars. So
right.
that was sort of what led to that.
Well, the good news is that it certainly appears, based upon the limited clip that we've seen, Tommy, that the officer used excessive force, which would, on its face, give rise to a civil claim. The reality of it is there's a thing called governmental immunity, which precludes you from suing law enforcement under just about all circumstances. There's it's what is it, USC 1893. Anyway, there's a code within the federal code that allows you to sue for excessive force, which this appears to be a case of. But in order, at least in Texas, for you to recover based upon an excessive force claim, you have to prove habit, custom, and practice. In other words, you have to prove not only did the misconduct occur here, but you have to show that it is a habit, custom, and practice of that particular police department in order for you to recover, which is practically impossible unless you can show it's in their policy and operating manual to use excessive force at all times. So, yeah, there's a lawsuit there. The likelihood of recovering anything substantial, absent some just way outside the bell curve policy, it's very, very difficult.
Have you ever worked a case where you were defending an officer in a similar light, or?
Yeah, not in the civil context, but in a criminal context for sure. At my age, I've defended just about everything, including police officers, FBI agents. I defended the head of DPS Narcotics Enforcement Section. I've defended judges, lawyers, prosecutors, what have you. Just because you stick around long enough and do decent enough work, you're going to defend those people. But not in a criminal context, I have, but not in a civil context.
Have you noticed a shift in how people, for example, who would be potentially called up into a jury, how the overall kind of American population's sentiment towards police officers has changed. Is that something that you
for sure
you've seen?
I think we have shifted. Back when dirt was young and dinosaurs ruled the earth, I was in elementary school, and there was a police in Amarillo, Texas, and I'll never forget there was a poster on the wall of a guy, some Dick Tracy looking dude in a blue police officer's uniform with a white glove, and it said "Trust your police." I mean, and that's what you did back in those days. As our nation and our world has become more fractured, and I use that term politely. I think particularly in a post-George Floyd era, people are much more suspicious of police officers than they used to be. I think Trump has created this demarcation and division in terms of what happened on January 6th or what didn't happen on January 6th. And in a windy way, Aaron, I think politics have become weaponized against law enforcement officers, against FBI agents, against judges, for good or for bad. I think that the uniform sentiment that used to exist, that law enforcement is to be trusted, is certainly, if it's not gone, it's fractionalized and marginalized for sure.
So what's the path forward to heal some of this, at least in terms of this specific area that's been fractured? How do people trust or gain their, how can authority like police officers start gaining trust back from the everyday people?
I think the trust went away slowly, and I think the only way to gain it back is through time. As my mother, who's been gone for several years, told me, and she didn't coin the phrase, but it's right. I mean, time heals almost everything, and I think it's going to take a long time for law enforcement, again, deservedly or undeservedly, to get that trust back of most folks. So I think it'll be a long way back.
Have you seen like a police department or a police force like purposely plant, evidence or stuff to?
100%. Yeah.
So, can you speak on sort of a case?
Yeah,
like
I mean,
that?
but back when I was a baby lawyer working for Mr. Haynes, I mean, and it's a true story. There's a poor fellow by the name of Joe Campus Torres, and Joe Campus Torres was a fellow who had been arrested by the Houston Police Department, and they threw him in the bayou, handcuffed, and he drowned. They threw him there to exert a confession, and he drowned. And it was loosely referred to the Houston bayou right there at Memorial, and sort of the I-45 exchange. They called it the Joe Campus Torres Memorial Swimming Pool. I mean, they joked about it for years. And Ray Horse and another now dead lawyer by the name of Mike Ramsey defended these two police officers for violation of their civil rights, intentional violation of their civil rights, and it was a case that was tried in LaGrange, Texas. And this is 1978, 79, and they were acquitted of violating this fellow's civil rights. And Mr. Haynes was asked, when was it that you knew? And it's a horrible thing, but it was just I say this not to attack my mentor's legacy, but to just show you how systemic that sort of conduct was. They asked Mr. Haynes, when did you know that you'd won the case? And he said, when I seated the last bigot on the jury, I was positive we'd won the case. And different times, different era, and again, not defending that conduct, but yeah, you saw that all the time. You saw drugs planted all the time. You saw officers fabricate testimony, with impunity. Two things that changed that for the better, thank God. One is body cams, right? I think body cameras absolutely hold officers accountable now in a way that we wouldn't possibly hold them accountable back in the day. And two, at least in Texas state practice, there's a thing called the Michael Morton Act. And Michael Morton, for those of you at home that don't know, Michael Morton was a man that was charged with the murder of his wife in Williamson County. This is probably back in the mid to late 80s. The prosecutor in the case failed to disclose favorable evidence that implicated another individual, the other individual who in fact did kill Michael Morton's wife. But Michael spent I think, Tommy, like 18 or 20 years for a murder that he didn't commit. And the Texas legislature came in and changed the discovery law in Texas and ultimately made just about everything, all the information that a prosecutor has access to, we're now entitled to. And that was a game changer. When I was a young lawyer, you were entitled to, and this is a windy answer, so I don't know how you guys chop it up, that's on you, but when I was a young lawyer, the only thing a defendant was entitled to was the defendant's statement and the access to the physical evidence that was going to be used against him, meaning look at the gun, look at the knife, look at whatever. That was it. We didn't have a right to look at witness interviews. We didn't have a right to look at co-defendant statements. It was, you know, it was discovery by trial. The only way you found out what the evidence was to go to trial. And the good news about that is it made really good trial lawyers out of it, right? Mm-hmm. Because you know, it was kind of like a gunfighter. You got fast or you died. Mm-hmm. The bad news is there's no telling how many people went to jail for crimes they didn't commit or for crimes that should have never been proven against them. So those two things, again, the body cams and the Michael Morton Act. Now, sadly, the legislature tried to cut back a lot of the benefits that the Michael Morton Act provided to us just this last session. I don't think they were successful, but again, have I seen offense reports, or have I seen instances rather where officers fabricated evidence? Hundreds of them. And I think that era is past. I hope that era is past, but the body cams, as much as Michael Morton, really changed the name of that game.
Got
for
it.
sure.
Do you think that can you explain to the audience what the relationship often is between like the police and attorneys? Like, do they have a relationship? What does that relationship look like?
You know, that's a good question. It was much more adversarial when I was a younger lawyer, 40 years ago. I thought that, I would engage in the ultimate gamesmanship, and I would impeach across through trickery and deceit and sleight of hand. That's what I thought my job description was when I started as a young lawyer, was to catch a cop and, make the jury believe a cop was lying. And what I found out after several years, that my hardest job description was getting law enforcement officers to tell the fucking truth. And that was really the art of the deal. It's less adversarial now than it used to be, in my opinion, again, because of the Michael Morton Act and because of body cams. It is still adversarial. Law enforcement officers, unless they're in trouble, they don't like me or they don't like defense lawyers. I have gained sort of a begrudging respect. The other side of that coin is an odd one, to the extent that I think I respect and trust law enforcement officers now much more than I did when I was beginning, because I realize how hard their job is. And again, in a post-George Floyd sort of world, law enforcement, they're vilified. I mean, Rusty Hardin, who's one of my dear friends, his son is a commander with HPD, and I've heard stories from him where, if they're doing a parade and you get urine thrown at you, you get blood thrown at you, you get spat upon, and I mean the disgust and the hatred and the distaste for law enforcement officers is at an all-time high, and that's not what should happen, right? And again, this will get the grandmothers in maybe not Waxahachie, but in the Third Ward clacking. What happened to George Floyd was horrible, just absolutely terrible. Those officers deserve every hour they get, for sure. But the idea to me that he's up there with some of the great, civil rights with Martin Luther King. I'm sorry, I don't really think George Floyd should be put on the same pedestal that Martin Luther King was put on. I'm not sure we should have statues of George Floyd. Again, I'll probably get hate mail for that, but that's just my view from the cheap seats.
So this is great, because I think a lot of people are obviously interested in this conversation, and you see a lot online. You mentioned the body cams and how they've been a net positive. What do you have to say to the everyday person who might be in a precarious situation, you see a lot of times now people will take their phones out and start recording. Is that something that you feel like is beneficial when things are happening of uncertainty, just to have some form of, record? Or what are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. I think, and I'm speaking simply as an interested observer like everybody else, what I think happens if they take out their cell phone when they're stopped and start recording the officer, I think that escalates the situation, right? I think that instinctively gets the officer in a defensive position, and does that stop the officer from doing anything? It's hard to say. I think the windy answer to that question, Aaron, is it sort of depends upon the situation. I would much rather have not my client filming or taking out their iPhone and filming if their wife or their girlfriend does it, or their boyfriend or their husband does it. It's probably not going to be as incendiary as the defendant itself. But I once had a teacher, I think in the 11th or 12th grade, say that if you follow a person around with the camera long enough, you can show that anybody and everybody is going to do something wrong, and I think that's true. So, do I think that there's a time and a place to take out your cell phone and videotape an officer? Sure. I wouldn't advise doing it on every occasion, at the same time.
How to follow that up with sort of the body cam stuff? How easy is it for a cop to turn it off or to go around that?
Good question. Oh, it wasn't working. Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing when I have clients, white collar clients who have very high security at their homes like we do. We've got cameras all over, not inside but outside and in the garage and what have you. And I've seen time after time where the FBI executes a search warrant and they grab the hard drive and it's not working anymore. So I see that pretty commonly.
Okay.
It's difficult, in Plano. Like Plano PD is very respected, and I feel like crime is generally low down here. But I've always had great relationships with officers. I have friends who are in the police, and I know through their stories that it's a difficult job. But there are always, of course, bad apples that get highlighted.
Let me say this about that. I think the smartest thing for anyone to do when they're pulled over is behave, and I mean stay behind. Don't get out. Don't mouth off to the officer. Keep your hands on the wheel in plain sight. The statistics show without question random stops are the most dangerous points in an officer's lives. Keep your hands on the wheel. Don't mouth off. Give them their driver's license if asked. If they're carrying contraband or they're doing something that they're concerned about their exposure, be respectful, be polite, and ask for a lawyer. I mean, none of this is hard. When you start motherfucking a cop or moving quickly or making suggestions that they're a thug booted Nazi or whatever, it's just going to escalate the situation. So rules of the road: if you're my client, then I'm going to tell you, and you get stopped, pull over, be respectful, shut the fuck up, and don't challenge the officer.
That's great. That's great. On the other side of the coin, there's a lot of videos where a person's refusing to show their ID to the cop, and that escalates the situation
while recording themselves.
Is that lawful to do that?
It's arguably lawful. There's cases that say that police officers don't have a right to request your ID, or there's no law requiring you to produce a driver's license or ID. Okay, why do we want to fight that battle? What's the net gain for someone, unless you're a fugitive, or unless you're assume someone else's identity? What's the point? Exactly what are you trying to accomplish there? So, unless you're a fugitive or something along those lines, and you're asked to produce your driver's license or your form of ID, produce it. Things will go a lot better. Whatever they are, it's going to be better than if you don't.
You know, it's interesting because I think there is like trends on social media of just civilians who maybe take a look into the law and do a little bit of research in terms of what they are able to do technically, and then they try to push the envelope with a cop and get like a gotcha moment with them on camera, which, you know, their job's difficult enough and it's such low-hanging fruit in terms of content, but this is a thing. So I can only empathize with my cop friends. You know, shout out to you guys. You know, job's not easy.
Let me give you a real-world example. There's a lawyer that I was once representing who probably everybody on this podcast or on this TikTok would know his name. We've discussed his name. But he was being investigated for potentially bribing a judge. Okay. I don't think he did, but he was being questioned by the FBI and by a prosecutor who'd flown in from Maine Justice to question him. And they said, you know, Mr. X, was Judge Y ever on your boat? No. Mr. X, I'm going to ask you again, was Judge Y ever on your boat? No. I'm thinking, okay, here we go. And they slide a picture of to Mr. X of Judge Y walking on Lawyer X's boat. It's a big boat. And he said, well, how do you explain that, Lawyer X? And Lawyer X said, that's not my boat. That's my ship. You want to ask a better question? And I said, excuse me just 1 minute, gentlemen. And I stepped outside and I said, what the fuck are you doing? These people have badges and guns and grand juries. Why are you fucking playing this games? Well, because they're assholes. I don't like their questions. That's not really your call. You know, our whole idea is to avoid being charged. So we're going to go back in there and we're going to say, I'm really sorry. I got a bit out of hand. Let's try this again. And we did. But the idea, Aaron, as you say, that people know a little bit about the law and they push the envelope, this was a big boy lawyer. I mean, he can buy and sell me in a second. And I always walked out of there thinking, what in the fuck is this lawyer trying to accomplish by being cute like that? But it makes my point. You're daring people with badges, guns, and grand juries at their quick disposable to fuck with you. What's the net gain in that?
Yeah.
Okay, so Dan, I wanna show you a quick clip from CBS News on the crypto kidnapping torture case that is happening right now in terms of the aftermath of it. But I'm gonna play this video and kind of get your opinion on what this world looks like.
William Duplessis appeared in a Manhattan courtroom Friday with bags under his eyes, indicted in a Bitcoin kidnapping scheme, along with John Waltz. Prosecutors allege the two men, both cryptocurrency investors in their 30s, lured an Italian millionaire to their ritzy Soho townhouse, where they held him captive and tortured him over 17 days. The suspects were arrested after the 28-year-old man managed to escape and flag down a traffic cop on the street. Inside the apartment, police say they found body armor, ammunition, and a photo of a gun held to the man's head.
To be tortured for 17 days in terms of a chainsaw cutting your leg, in terms of putting your feet in the water and electrocuting them, in terms of making the person ingest narcotics. Horrible crime.
Prosecutors say the suspects took the alleged victim's electronics and threatened to kill his family unless he gave up the password to his Bitcoin wallet, worth millions. As the NYPD parsed through evidence in Soho this week, French police have arrested more than 20 people for a number of kidnapping plots targeting crypto tycoons, which includes the attempted abduction of an investor's daughter by masked men.
So this is clearly a thing that's happening now because the way that crypto can be transferred. What are your thoughts on something like this? Have you seen anything like it or worked a case that might be similar? I know crypto is a little different, but what are your overall opinions on this case?
Never anything involving crypto kidnappings. Frankly, I don't believe. Let me search my memory file for a second. The only kidnapping case or any case involved kidnapping was the slave ranch case, which is a whole nother kettle of fish. But the reality of kidnapping cases is very rarely are they financially successful, and even more rarely does the defendant, if he's caught, have adequate funds to retain a lawyer. So most of your kidnapping cases are going to involve the defense lawyers are going to be court-appointed lawyers simply because they probably didn't have great resources to begin with. That's why they're kidnapping people, right?
Yeah. So these two people are crypto investors. I think have millions in crypto and kidnapped a guy. And the way crypto works is that you basically have a digital wallet that's accessible by a passcode.
Right.
So they were trying to torture him to get his passcode to get receive the Bitcoin that he has worth millions. What kind of time? I know we talked in a previous episode about the Carrie B trial and how killing somebody could be 2 years or maybe a life sentence depending on the type of killing it was. Like, what kind of time are these people looking to get?
Well, that's a New York case. It appears because NYPD, as opposed to the FBI, was involved. I'm going to assume the prosecution, the ground zero of the prosecution, is New York State as opposed to a federal prosecution. I don't know what the state laws in New York, the exposure he would have, but I would assume it's a first-degree felony or the New York variation of that. If it was Texas kidnapping where there's bodily injury or a threat of death is a first degree, it's 5 to 99 or life, so it's the same penalty range as a murder case. So these guys have got serious exposure, so they're probably going to get a couple of decades at least of free room and board. So they got some serious exposure.
Got it.
So I know you mentioned the slave ranch case. We're not going to dig into that. That's going to be saved for a separate episode because there's just a lot of material there that we want to cover. But I do want to kind of continue down this line of
how common are kidnappings and sort of cases like this, not in relation to Bitcoin, but just in general?
Not, right? Yeah. In 42 years, I've had exactly one case that involved kidnapping. Now, I've had sexual assault cases where, some guy was angry at his girlfriend or they got in a fight and he locked her in the car and drove her across town and put her in a closet or whatever, and they allege kidnapping. But those aren't real kidnapping cases along the lines of that mountaintop.
So I want to discuss one of the cases that you did represent, actually a couple here today that I just find absolutely fascinating and are in this kind of world of fraud. Operation Lightning Strike was an FBI undercover sting operation conducted between 1991 and 1993, targeting alleged fraud, kickbacks, and corruption at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Can you kind of give us an insight on that case and your involvement?
Yeah, representing a guy named Dan Stinger, and Dan had a co-defendant, but they were charged with government fraud. The theory of the government was that they had defrauded the government because they had received federal funds in order to make these robots that were instrumental in the fabrication of various parts of different rockets. And the creation of the robots didn't go as quickly as the government believed it should have. And so they charged them with fraud for basically taking money and not creating the product that they had promised to create. It turns out that, and the theory of the government was they never did anything, there were no blueprints, there were no efforts, there were no nothing, they just took the money and did nothing, therefore it was fraud because they never had any intention of following through with the contract, therefore it was fraud. Turns out things were a little different than the indictment alleged. In fact, in their opening statement, the prosecutors in that case said, not even a blueprint, not even a blueprint, not even a blueprint, never did anything, never did anything, never did. Aaron, we were in trial about a couple of weeks, and the prosecutor named Abe Martinez came in one afternoon, and I looked over on the prosecution's table, And my client swore to me, dude, we had blueprints. I promise you, they got the blueprints during the execution of the search warrant. They know we have blueprints. They know and this was back in 91, 92, where everything wasn't saved to a flash drive, so it was much harder to prove what you had. I promise you we had blueprints. I promise you we were going to make them, or we were in the process of making them. And the government kept saying, no blueprints, no blueprints, We were in trial a couple of weeks, and I came back from lunch and looked over at the prosecution table, and I saw something that sure looked like blueprints. And, you know, it was bad manners, but I went over there and I unrolled the blueprints, and they were the fucking blueprints that the government had been maintaining for weeks, not only to this jury, but to a federal judge, didn't exist. And the prosecutor walks in and says, what are you doing looking at my evidence? And I said, what the fuck are you doing hiding this evidence from me when you knew it existed all along? You falsely charged my guy with we just came in. I said, bullshit. You guys, the FBI has had this for months, if not years. What the ever living fuck? And it was within probably 24 hours that the case got dismissed. It was dismissed not only for insufficiency, but for prosecutorial misconduct. And it was outrageous what they had done to this guy. I mean, they had turned his life upside down. They had charged him with federal felonies with exposure of decades. And when he was, he wasn't not guilty, which in my view means there was a reasonable doubt or the government couldn't prove it. He was innocent. He had not done it, and the government knew he had not done it. It's not the most outrageous case involving prosecutorial misconduct I've ever seen, but it's top 5 in my history for sure.
That's insane. So in terms of, you said it's bad manners, like walk us through I guess what's allowed and what's not allowed and what you did. So you saw like a pile of evidence and then you just sort of went there.
I went there because it was obvious to me it was the blueprints that they said didn't exist. So should I have been looking on what they were going to introduce into evidence? No. But first off, I didn't really feel bad about it because they were violating the law in the name of the law, right? So if I was going to get my hand slapped for looking at shit, okay, I'll take that.
And that's not illegal to do.
Look, it is and it isn't. You should never look through an opponent's file, right? But they were getting ready to introduce this evidence. And in order to introduce this evidence, they should have shown it to me before trial because you file a witness list and an exhibit list. And in that exhibit list, you're supposed to not only describe what that exhibit is, but you're supposed to give the other side access to it. So should I have gone over there and done that? No, but I didn't really give a fuck at that point because my client's future, his liberty, in addition to everything else, was on the line. So yeah, did I cross the line by looking at stuff before they offered it to me for inspection? Yeah, but they should have told me about it on day one. This case should have never been filed.
Insane.
So
Insane.
I'll take that knuckle rap.
So do you think that they even knew it was there?
They said they didn't know that they had it, which is, to me, a completely vacuous response. How do you not know you've had? Now, maybe this prosecutor didn't know, but the FBI damn sure knew because the only way they could have gotten it was through the execution of the search warrant, right? Mm-hmm. And through that search warrant, they obtained evidence. So while this prosecutor did not arguably know, the government did, because if the FBI knows it, the FBI is the government. So yeah, they knew. Okay, they is a little amorphous, but it is the United States of America versus my client. Now just stop there for a second. People think it's a fair proceeding and it's a fair trial and people are presumed innocent and all this bullshit. When the style of the case is the United States of America versus you, that's not your team seems pretty small and their team seems pretty big. And but it's just, and it's the same thing. The state of Texas versus Dan Cogdell. Holy shit! Everybody in the state is against me. But I'm being a little histrionic because that's the reality of being charged in a criminal case. The resources of your opposition are titanic. I don't care how wealthy your client is. I don't care how good a lawyer you think you are or how good of a lawyer he has hired or she has hired. The odds ain't good. I mean, that is the definition of the stacked deck when it is the United States of America versus you. You know?
That's
so
insane.
Dan, I mean, I love that. It seems like when you go up against FBI and NASA or these like David versus Goliath moments, is there something that like fires you up, kind of being the underdog? Like, what is that? What is that underdog mentality? Can you talk us through that?
I've been the underdog all my life. I mean, have you seen my wife? I mean, the odds of me marrying her or, any other beautiful woman ain't good. So I like a challenge. What can I say?
Have you ever been afraid for your life? Like, at any point in your career where you're like, oh, it's like, my life is in danger?
Let me answer it this way. When I was a younger lawyer, I was much more physically adversarial. I mean, I've challenged prosecutors to a fight, and let's meet you outside at lunch, motherfucker. I mean, I've done that. I have done that. I've calmed way down, but I've never been fearful of. I haven't been fearful of my life or what have you. Have I been concerned that a prosecutor or an agent particularly might plant something on me? Sure. I'll give you a real-world example. There was a case called United States versus Larry Ramming et al. It's probably 1998. And the prosecutor in that case was a woman named Julia Hyman. I will argue that she was appropriately named. This is a true story. Her name was Julia Hyman. And when I first met with her, it was after the SNL implosion where, well, anyway, let's stay away from it because it's too wordy and too needy. But the first time I met with her, and I believe my client had done nothing wrong. He was a friend of mine, a good friend of mine at the time, and he was charged with wire fraud, mail fraud, mortgage fraud, bank fraud, every kind of fraud. And I knew Larry, and I knew him well, and I knew his business, and I knew that she didn't understand his business. The easiest explanation, Tommy, is when the S&Ls failed, 85% of savings and loans failed in the early 90s when oil went from $32 a barrel to $8 a barrel. Just about all these savings and loans were premised upon mortgages, right? So when everybody in the oil business lost their ass, nobody could pay their mortgages, and the institutions collapsed. So what happened was all that paper, all that mortgage paper, was for sale. The institutions were fire selling that paper. So they were selling mortgages at 10 cents on the dollar, literally. So what Ramming and others did was they repackaged, repurposed these mortgages and sold them at 40 cents on the dollar or 50 cents on the dollar, which unless you understand the details of that business, well, how do you buy something for 10 cents and sell it for 50 cents? There's got to be some fraudulent conduct. No, there was no fraudulent conduct. But anyway, I went and met Miss appropriately named Hyman at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and she said, this is not a question of if I'm going to indict him. It's a question of when I'm going to indict him. I mean, from day one, she was intent on. So there were time after time after time we caught her speeding and making misrepresentations and saying things that weren't quite accurate or saying things, that were wholly inaccurate. And at one point, I'll never forget this exchange. A very good judge, I love the man, he's still on the bench today, he said at the bench when it was, day 7 of her, what I meant, he said, Miss Hyman, I'm concerned that either you or a lawyer representing you in the future is going to take the position that your remarks to me are not subject to an analysis for perjury or a review for perjury because they're not sworn to, which is a chilling thing for a judge to say. And she said, Judge, I don't know what to say. And he said, I do. Raise your right hand. mean, the air was sucked out of the room. I mean, it was like, holy shit moment. I will never forget that moment. But anyway, the case got dismissed because of prosecutorial misconduct. The two of the FBI agents were held in contempt, right? So two things that I will never forget beyond that. Thing number one is, to this day, that was in 1998, in the year of our Lord 2025, when I check my luggage, going anywhere, my luggage gets searched every single time. Every single time. To this day, a generation and more later, they still search my luggage. The second thing is I was behind in I owed the IRS some money, right, at the time, shocker. And I was on a payment plan, an easy payment plan with the IRS where I was paying $10,000 a month, whatever it was. And after we won that case, the case gets dismissed, we're high-fiving. I drank in those days a lot. And I was going to the ATM and was going to withdraw a couple $100 to go get my drink on. And I kept showing a zero balance, and I couldn't get my money out. I'm like, what the fuck? I know I've got enough money to get a couple $100, but it turns out that the IRS agent that was involved in Ramming's case, he single-handedly reneged my agreement with the IRS, and they froze my accounts. So is there retribution and payback from law enforcement when you fuck with them? You damn sure there is.
Wow.
That's insane. To follow up on what we were talking about previously about sort of courtroom misconduct, I'm curious to hear sort of a moment where there was like an insane courtroom misconduct that you either experienced or that you had sort of like the wildest courtroom, misconduct moment.
Again, we've talked about the cattle prodding. That was one of the, it's wild courtroom moments or bits, or it's kind of hard to just pick one because it's like your kids. I mean,
was there ever like a fight or somebody throwing a punch or maybe
I've threatened to hit a prosecutor, and which was wildly inappropriate. Now this wasn't in front of a jury, but on a handful of occasions where I caught a prosecutor lying or making a misrepresentation in my youth. There was a very heavy-set prosecutor in a case that Mr. Haynes and I were trying, and he kept suggesting to the jury that I was unethical or I was sleazy or would you really want to believe this lawyer doing that shit? And at a break, I finally pulled him aside and I said, "Listen, you fat motherfucker, if you denigrate me one more time, I will whip your fucking ass, either inside the courtroom or outside the courtroom. You fucking pick, fat boy, because it's going to happen. One more fucking word out of you about me being less than ethical, I'm not going to give a fuck about my ethics. I'm going to give a fuck about breaking your fucking fat nose." Oh my God. It's been a minute.
That's insane.
Am I proud of that? No. But, at some point in time, there's a straw that breaks every camel's back. You can only tolerate it for so long. Am I proud of it? No. Do I regret it? Fuck no.
Would Racehorse Haynes if he either heard that or saw that, would he be like,
"Oh, dude, Haynes would always one up me on that shit." I remember him telling a prosecutor in one of the cases we tried. He literally said, "I would hit you, but I'd be charged with a felony because my hands are registered as lethal weapons." He was a Golden Gloves boxer, and he took no shit. I mean, I was timid compared to Richard.
That's awesome.
So I want to talk a little bit about another case that you worked, Dan, and this was a bribery case in Houston. It was called the Houston City Hall bribery case, often referred to as Houston City Hall scandal. Was a high-profile federal corruption case in the late 1990s that involved allegations of bribery and corruption at the municipal level. Judge John H. Peavy Jr., a former state district judge and city council member, was acquitted of all charges. So you represented Judge John Peavy. Before I kind of dig into this case specifically, bribery seems to be kind of at the center of a lot of these in general, these bribery cases, they're happening pretty often, right? it seems like everybody's got a number, right? Everyone can be bought. Like, what's your experience with that? Do you feel like there's, it's a certain amount of number that like buys anyone over, or it's just the person themselves that have like an inclination of?
I think it's a little more nuanced than that. Is everybody for sale? No. Does everybody have a number at some point they'd be tempted? Sure, absolutely. In a lot of politicians' cases, and particularly in this case, Aaron, Judge Peavy was a state district judge. He was a divorce judge for 15, 20 years. And when I think he was defeated or he retired from the bench, then he became a city councilman. Well, in Houston in those days, and probably these days, the pay that a city councilman gets is next to nothing. I mean, it was like $12,000 a year, $15,000 a year. Well, you can't eat on $15,000 a year. And sadly, it's the same in the Texas legislature. I mean, I don't know what our senators make or our state reps make, but it ain't much. You know, most of the time, it's not even enough to buy them a home that they can live in when it's in session. I mean, it's next to nothing. So the downside, or a downside to all of that, is you're going to have politicians who are in a stretched financial position, whether they're the most well-intended or not. You know, you got to eat, you got kids, you got cars, you got a mortgage, you got to eat. So they are susceptible to financial incentive, whether it's legitimate through campaign contributions or it's illegitimate through bribes. It's just the nature of the beast. If you don't pay your folks well enough, they're going to be financially leveraged. And in this particular case, there were, I think, half a dozen city councilmen, including my client, Judge Peavy, who were charged with bribery. And in Judge Peavy's case, the snitch was a guy named Julio Molinero. And the FBI had set up this sting for years. And there were a couple of people that they really wanted to go after. One of them was Betty Maldonado, and another was Ben Reyes. Ben Reyes was a long-time financial, or a long-time Hispanic political figure in the Houston community. Ben was a city councilman. He was a state rep. He was a state senator. He was a force. He was one of the most powerful Hispanic, early on, one of the most powerful Hispanic political folks around. And the FBI had a hard-on for Ben for years. And so through the snitch, they would take him out to lunch and meet him at a restaurant somewhere and give him an envelope. Here you go, Judge. Here you go, Ben. Here you go, Betty. So and most of these were tape recorded. So, you had literally a snitch who's passing an envelope of cash. Well, I'm sorry, most of the time, if somebody passes me an envelope, unless I think it's got anthrax in it, I'm probably going to take the envelope. Do I know what's in it? No. Should I know what's in it? Maybe, depending upon what the tone and the nuance of the conversation is. Should I look at it? Maybe. But in Judge Peavy's case, Judge Peavy was kind of from the street, and about every other time he would open his mouth, he would say, "I know that's right. I know that's right. I know." And we had hours of conversation at lunches where he was saying, "I know that's right." So no matter what was said to him, more often than not, his response would be, "I know that's right." So, the Astros had a great game today. I know that's right. Well, I'm giving you this money because it's a bribe. I know that's right. Maybe whatever it was, he would say, "I know that's right." We went through, I think, 3 trials. First 2 trials, I think the first 2 trials, Ben and Betty were convicted in the original trial, the mistrial in the second trial, and we had a 3rd trial. But ultimately, it was acquitted. He was acquitted, and he should have been acquitted because I think the proof just simply wasn't there. But I guess my windy explanation is I felt awful for the people involved because they were financially susceptible, because their pay was so low, and you had an active, ongoing, steady, and I mean, they wanted scalps. They kept coming with different options and different monies and different propositions. And the first time you said, "No, I don't want to do that," they'd come back with another opportunity and another option and another push.
So is it right that you essentially were framing the cash payments as campaign contributions rather than bribes?
We didn't, our position was quite clearly, we didn't know what was in the envelope. And if we took it's not a crime to take cash. It's not a crime if you're a politician to take cash. It's not a crime for anyone to take cash. It's a crime if and only if you agree to do something illegal because you took the cash, right? So there has to be a quid, which is the offer or the money, and a quo pro, which is the agreement to do something illegal.
What are your thoughts on campaign contributions in general for politicians? Because it does seem like a form of bribery. Like it feels like the politicians are not as driven to serve their constituents as they are to take care of the people who are taking care of them. Like, what is your opinion on that, having the experience and kind of orbit that you're in?
I mean, I've represented mayors, I've represented governors, I've represented Paxton, who's the AG. I guess my take on it is, again, a nuanced one. It is so expensive to run a campaign these days. I think I understood from a conversation that to run for a senator, you've got to raise in the area of $40 million to successfully, campaign. That's a staggering amount of money. It's just unbelievable. Better yet, and I didn't know this until, frankly, a couple of weeks ago, that the laws are structured to serve the incumbents, meaning if you are a challenger, the maximum a husband and wife can contribute is $14,000. That's all a husband and wife can contribute. If, however, you are the incumbent, the guardrails literally don't exist. You can, I think it's like 50,000 or 70,000. You can raise much more from single contributions or husband and wife contributions as an incumbent than you can as a challenger, which would explain why we have senators in office for generations, because it's a rigged game. To me, that's crazy. The rules ought to be the same for the challenger and the incumbent, and the public doesn't understand that. I didn't understand that. But does that raise the possibility of people taking money corruptly or inappropriately? Of course it does. When you have to raise that kind of funds, I mean, you're going to have your hand out the whole time. I couldn't raise $40 million if my life depended on it. I don't think I could raise $4 million. I don't think I could raise, $1 million. So the idea that they have to go out and campaign to raise the sort of funds to require you to successfully run is insane to me. To me, I think there ought to be campaign limits. You should, whether it's $1 million or $2 million, or set a limit and make the rules the same. And not only, and again, Aaron, I don't know what the rules are. To me, they're fuzzier than they need to be. What happens if you don't spend the money during the campaign? Do you get to keep it? Do you have to save it for the next campaign? What is a campaign expense and what is not a campaign expense? Is a chauffeured Escalade a campaign expense, or is it a personal? I don't know. And I'm sure that there's the laws out there, but I don't know what they are. But to me, the punchline is it's way too costly to campaign. The rules are way too slanted for the incumbents and not the challengers, and we ought to have limits.
What about this case or other cases taught you about defending clients in those public corruption cases? How has that shaped your approach in similar challenges since?
Again, it's very fuzzy. To me, it's unquestioned oftentimes whether the client or the individual has taken the money. What was in his mind when he took the money, that's what a jury's focus should be on. And it's difficult, not only is it difficult for a prosecutor to show what's in a defendant's or a prosecutor's or politician's mind, but it's difficult for a politician to credibly articulate what was in his mind when he took the money. In other words, you never want your client to testify in a criminal case, right? You don't. That's never the best option, because the whole game shifts. It shifts from whether or not the state or the government has proved the case beyond a reasonable doubt to whether or not the prosecutor can show a jury that your client is lying about one thing, and that one thing can be anything, and that anything or that one thing doesn't have to be related to the accusation or the charge. In other words, I drove an Escalade to lunch. No, it wasn't an Escalade. It was a Navigator, as if that has anything to do with anything. But a jury will believe, because people argue it credibly, that if they're lying about the little thing, they're lying about the big thing. So that's why you don't ever want your client to have to testify, whether it's a bribery trial or murder trial or anything else. But to your point, in a bribery trial, not only is your client A, the defendant, who comes with less credibility than just about anybody else because he's got the most to lose and the most to gain, but B, he's a politician, and that's a very binary sort of analysis. People either like him or they don't. And C, it's very easy to be cross-examined not only about that instance, but other instances. So it's a shark-infested pool that your client jumps into, or you and your client jump into in a bribery trial.
So you're known for your colorful courtroom rhetoric. Your TikTok rhetoric is picking up as well. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. So this says you had a saying that the government had its tongue down the throats of a cooperating witness.
I said that in the PV trial.
Yeah, in the PV trial, right?
I did.
Can you share with us how you decide when to dial up the theatrics in the courtroom? Like what's going on in your head? Is this an instinct? Is it like a formula?
It's almost always instinct. I mean, I've been a smart ass since I was in the third grade. I was the class clown from the third grade through. I mean, that's just who I am. It's not a question of whether or not I'm operating on instinct. It's a question of whether or not I can restrain that, right? Whether or not I go too far. And I would like to think I'm not a one-trick pony, that I can turn it up or turn it down, but I'm very emotional, and I'm emotionally attached to my clients. And do I cross the line and go over the top sometimes? For sure. Absolutely. Do I regret that? No. I really don't, because I think a jury will forgive me for going too far, right? I think they will. I think what they see is, in fact, what's happening, a lawyer who gives a shit about his client. So in the Branch Davidian trial, the turret of the tanks penetrated the house, and I likened the floors to the floors were slipperier than gorilla snot, and people were, and it's one of these things that rolled. And the court reporter pulled me aside after the trial. And he said, "Mr. Cogdell, I've never had to put slippery than gorilla snot in my stenograph machine." It's just one of those things that rolls. But again, does a jury want to hear that? I think a little. I think they want to be entertained. Dude, if you're a juror in a criminal case or in any case that goes on for days or weeks or months, of course you get bored shitless. Of course you want some entertainment. Can lawyers take it too far? Sure. But I think the line is I think there's a line of demarcation. I think if a prosecutor gets too showy or gets too flamboyant, I think that'll backfire them, because they're there to pitch balls and strikes, right? They're not there to get too colorful and to get too showy. So to their credit or not, I think most good prosecutors have sort of a Dick Tracy approach, just the facts, ma'am. And I think by nature, defense lawyers are allowed or encouraged or have to be a little showier, a little more flamboyant. So I don't apologize for that. It's who the hell I am.
I mean, it's what we love you for. I mean, it's fun to hear the stories, because you're obviously such a great storyteller, but it is interesting to understand kind of what goes through your psyche when you're trying to, again, put the jury to, on this journey with you to help them understand, what the right verdict should be. But I mean, these cases are so interesting, and I know that you brought up Branch Davidian. That's something that we're programming for kind of like a whole episode because of how just interesting that case is and your involvement. And David Koresh, I found pretty fascinating himself.
But in terms of the courtroom theatrics or slang or sayings, they're not all original, right? I mean, in the Kahana case, in the Enron case, there's the movie Casino is one of my favorite movies. And there's a line in there, I think Joe Pesci's narrating, and he said Las Vegas is like a giant car wash. It's where people come to wash their sins away. And I liken the Enron prosecution so in Kahanik's trial, a bunch of witnesses did a bunch of shit they shouldn't have done, a bunch of prosecution witnesses, and I was coming after them. But all was forgiven by the government. There was some insider trading that happened on the part of the government's witnesses, but as long as you testified for the government, you could get away with that shit, right? The government was turning a blind eye, and I said the Enron prosecution team is a lot like a car wash. You know, that's where people with sins go to have their sins washed away and forgiven, and it tracked. Right, and I don't necessarily think that people remembered the movie Casino, but it tracks. So all my little one-liners and sayings, they're not contrived. I don't write them out the night before, and I don't stand in the mirror and go, "It's like a car wash." It's like a car wash. It's a car wash. I don't do that shit.
Have you ever done that once before?
No.
Come on the shower.
No. I don't like looking at myself, especially at this age. But do I go over my final argument? You damn straight I do. But I have never, not once in 42 years, sat down and I've paced it, right? So if I'm working on a PowerPoint, I know how long it's going to take me. But I've never rehearsed a final argument from beginning to end. And maybe I should, but my fear is once you rehearse it, and particularly if you rehearse it more than once, it's gonna sound like it was rehearsed. So I err on the side of being spontaneous and being genuine and being real. Maybe I should rehearse it more. I don't know.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious, and that's so awesome. And what's so interesting to me is that since we've been around you for the past couple months, a lot of people think you're so funny that they think that your profession's a comedian. Do you see any relation with lawyers and comedians? And are you a fan of comedy at all?
Sure, huge fan of comedy.
And I feel like there's a little bit of overlap with sort of rehearsing your bit and sort of getting the audience's attention with laughs. And then also sort of maybe persuading a jury by sort of your storytelling ability. Do you also see that similarity?
I think being a comic is the hardest job in the world. I mean, those guys are geniuses. To be able to do what they do in an hour or even a 5-minute set. You know how long 5 minutes is? Well, ask my wife. It's a long time. But it takes forever to work up a 5-minute bit or a 10-minute bit, and I'm in awe of those guys that can do that. It's unbelievable to me that because I've got notes, I've got PowerPoints, I've got an outline. Do I stand up and read from it? Fuck no, but I've got it there, as a panic button, and I flip the page or I come back to the podium or whatever. They just riff. To me, that's genius. Those guys are my heroes that can do that. And to be able to time it and wait for the audience, or worse yet, when the audience doesn't, and what you do, and do you keep going with that joke? Do you flip it to another one? That's brilliant stuff. That's really hard.
Awesome.
Do you think
Ron White, by the way, I love the dude. And people say, I 100 times, you remind me of Ron White. And I that's a compliment to me. That's a great fucking compliment to me. I think he's one of the OGs. I think he's fucking brilliant. My favorite bit of his is the whole Tiger Woods thing, with I love that bit. Why is he getting criticized for the ones that he did? It's the ones he turned. There were 7,000 women he didn't. I love that shit.
No, that's hilarious. We had a funny conversation, Tommy and I, in our podcast of what profession. So there's a terminology called Riz. Are you familiar with Riz? Mm. So Riz is essentially game, like spitting game at a girl.
Okay.
What was the phrase that you guys, when you were coming up?
Bullshit.
Kind of bullshitting?
Yeah.
Okay, so bullshit.
Bullshit or game. You got
bullshit.
good game, got good bullshit.
Yeah, so
Riz, that's that.
R-I-Z-Z, Riz.
Riz, got
it. So they'll say, yeah, guys will admire other guys and be like, that guy's got Riz because he gets all the girls, right? So we went through a breakdown of what profession or archetype of man, really profession, has the most riz. So if you could give us a little breakdown of your opinion on, because lawyers are up there because you guys are storytellers, but what profession do you think, because we have one in mind, which we'll share with you, which you should know this because you've been in this world, but where do you think, what stacks highest as the riz master?
I think good trial lawyers are easy top three. I think comedians are top three. I don't know. That's 2 out of 3. I don't know what the third would be.
That's awesome. So me and Aaron were talking about it. We got musician, like rock star.
But they don't have to have good bullshit. They just have to be.
He's right. That one doesn't really count because
Axl Rose or whomever, they just have to walk in and be.
That's true.
But we weren't talking about Riz. We were talking about just who can pull. The
okay,
most.
but let's get Riz is better. Riz is better. So trial lawyer I like. Comedian we put in our top 3. You know what the third one is that we put up? That beats all of them?
Do not.
Religious cult leader.
There you go. I think that's true.
I mean, when I'm watching David Koresh, I'm just like, damn, this guy probably, and any of them really, they're getting married women to stop sleeping with their husbands to be with.
That's pretty impressive. Pretty impressive.
So, that's kind of a fun subject for us to end on, but Dan, appreciate your time. I mean,
it's always fun, guys. It's one of my, I mean, for those sitting at home in their mother's basement, I actually drive here from Houston, and it's 5 hours. Thanks, assholes, to get here, and it's one of the highlights of my week. It's great. I love doing this show.
No,
it cracks me up that people are watching me. It's just that's hilarious.
It shouldn't, because you are kind of the Ron White of the trial lawyer space, and Joe Rogan. We reached out to Joe, via Twitter, and be like, you got to look at what Dan's doing, and have some of his stories on, because we do feel like your platform is obviously raising and your audience is raising naturally, and we're excited about more people kind of hearing your stories and your perspective on things.
I'm going to make Rogan at least get me on the Southwest flight. He's got enough money.
There you go. So soon you're going to be
JSX
on,
maybe. Who knows?
Exactly.
Soon you're going to be on that JSX flight, sponsored. Cogdell on Law, sponsored by JSX, to straight to Rogan's, to really get even a bigger audience. And of course, that's what we want for you.
We're having people message on TikTok asking for you to come to speaking events.
Let me show you this really quickly. Let me show you this.
Don't get between me and the camera. It's dangerous airspace. I'll show up.
I'll show you off camera. It'll take me a second to find the message. But people are reaching out and they're like, hey, we love this guy. I got people in my own family friend group and personal close friends of mine reaching out like, man, I can't get enough. This guy's so entertaining.
True story. And you guys know this, but I think it's worth saying, because of what Trump is doing to the white collar space. I mean, he's effectively eliminating my job description. As I've said before, not jokingly, it's a great time to be a white collar criminal, not so great time to be a white collar criminal defense lawyer, because the guardrails have come off, the FBI is not investigating the case. So what I'm trying to do selfishly is expand my brand and my reach and make myself more accessible. I'll go try a civil case. I'll go try a divorce case. I'll try. You get me in front of 12 people who aren't smart enough to get off jury duty, I'll do a good job. I mean, that's what I do. So that's selfishly, other than get to hang out with you guys, that's kind of what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, of course. And that's what we want for you. And I mean, you like I said, you're getting this fan base, you're getting this audience, and it's because of your experience, it's because of the way you tell stories, it's because of your uncensored nature and everything. Like I said, when we started here, Dan is the same guy on camera as he is off camera. That's what makes him great.
That's good and bad.
Good and bad.
And to the comments that are, commenting saying that, does Dan only do white collar cases? Like, we're going to make sure that they know that it's not just white collar cases that you do.
But I'll try anything. I've tried. Yeah. I was a team of lawyers who probably handled the most expensive divorce in the history of Harris County. There's a billionaire family, and me and several other lawyers do. But I guess what I want to say before we close is, I love to read the negative comments about me. I think they're awesome, and sometimes they're not far off from wrong. I mean, the arrogant asshole. Okay. Self-absorbed prick.
Dan, I want you
pretty good.
I want you just for us here. I want you to respond to a clip that we have on our. Speaking of negative comments, this is for Sujan.
While you pull that up, in terms of clips, because you've seen the clips that we post on your profile, do you think that it's capturing sort of you accurately, or do you think that it's a little bit more of like sort of too TikTok-y in terms of the content?
I mean, there's nothing I've said here that I wouldn't say to someone's face.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. If anything, sometimes I think I'm less animated here than I am in the real world, because generally by the time we do these, I've driven or I've had a long night or I got up at 5 or whatever. So, nah.
So there hasn't been anyone that's reached out to you saying, "Hey, maybe you shouldn't be too, open, on this platform since it's going to
some
get."
of these morons are saying I'm violating the attorney-client privilege. Well, there's nothing I've ever said in any one of these interviews that hasn't been testified to or admitted into evidence in a court. He said what Kerry said. Well, yeah, no shit, it was testified to. I didn't violate a privilege. It's already out there.
Yeah.
So Dan, I want you to see this post from our one of our teammates here, Sujan, who wasn't able to make it today. But if you notice, we have a post here that was uploaded yesterday, and it has over 300,000 views. And he's getting railed in the comment section. So speaking of getting beat up, I want to play this for you and just kind of get your opinion.
If you take an Indian street food vendor and put them side by side in Turkey or Mexico, nobody complains about hygiene.
Hell no. Everyone will stay away from that booth, bro.
Nobody will complain about hygiene. That's my argument.
So that's the clip. Essentially, Sujan is repping for his Indians and saying, if you took the longer kind of context behind this conversation is we were talking about street food, like street food vendors, and I was kind of like, giving them some shit about the Indian street food vendors because they've got such a bad rep online right now. It's a very popular thing to just trash on them. And there's a lot of videos and real videos, fake videos.
People getting sick, or they feeding them cats.
People are getting sick. People are sort of barefoot.
It's like the guys are barefoot and it's like not very hygienic, and they're just grabbing things and tossing it into a bowl, handing it over. And
it is street food.
It is street food. And so a lot of parody accounts are creating these like guys who have their feet in a bowl and they're like, serving, they're cutting like naan bread with their toenails and passing it over. So this has very much become a thing online. So I brought it up with Sujan and I said, Sujan, what's up with because he's not Indian himself, but he does a lot of business there and he travels there often and he's just like a champion for them. And I was like, yo, where are the clean videos? Like, we need the clean ones. Where do we go to find the good Indian street food? We need to have them out there. And his take was, if you took an Indian vendor to Turkey or Mexico, that you wouldn't even notice that they were dirty because it's just the same as any other street food. And that blew the internet up. And he's got several thousand. He's got 1,500. So we got never seen this comment alone has 6,700 likes. In Mexico, street food stands with. Hold on, this is awful take. Never seen Mexican street vendors serve food while being barefooted. Mexican street food vendors are very mindful. I fear this is your opinion alone. Put tariffs on podcast equipment. Dan, the amount of times we get this comment on our podcast is unreal. And it has 4,500 likes. And
that's awesome.
Since starting with you, Dan, we haven't got that comment one time. So clearly people, even when they hate Dan, they want to listen to him. There's never like, this guy shouldn't even be on a podcast. But we were just having some fun. Shout out to Sujan. Wish you were here. But we'll go ahead and
wrap. Until next time.
Until next time.